Hello everyone, my name is Aaron Christensen and this is Horror 101 with Dr. AC, a gathering place for fellow fiends the world over to discuss all things freaky and frightening. If you want to be part of the conversation, and I hope you do, I invite you to like this video, subscribe to the channel, maybe go back and check out some of our previous episodes, leave a comment, and most importantly, let us know the fright flicks you'd like to discuss in the future. That kind of connection is exactly what we're looking for, and it really does make a difference. We're all about sharing the scare, and we want to hear from you. From the moment the original Frankenstein from Universal Studios was released in November of 1931, the landscape of cinema changed forever as Mary Shelley's creation became a household word overnight. Unsurprisingly for Hollywood, further adventures featuring the Frankenstein monster followed, some critically acclaimed, others derided, while the fan base grew, passed on through generations of horror fans. Tonight, we examine the third film in the Universal canon, Son of Frankenstein, celebrating its 85th anniversary, as well as the legendary comedy from Mel Brooks, 1974's Young Frankenstein, celebrating its 50th anniversary. I'm super excited to chat about these two horror classics, and I've got an awesome panel that's going to chat about them with me, so let's bring everybody in, and let's say hello to Dave Gray from Raiders of the Podcast.
Hi.
Michael Weber from Porchlight Theater.
Hi, how are you?
Fraser Coffeen from Creepy History Podcast.
Hi there.
And Doug Long from DePaul University.
Hello.
And we are here to talk about Son of Frankenstein from 1939, celebrating its 85th anniversary, and Young Frankenstein from 1974, celebrating its, can you believe it, 50th anniversary. Thank you all for coming on the show and welcome. Most people have probably come to Young Frankenstein first and then maybe found their way back to Son of Frankenstein, which I feel like is a really odd experience considering how much of Son of Frankenstein is being parodied in Young Frankenstein. But let's go ahead and start off with the original, the OG, Son of Frankenstein from 1939. I feel like Frankenstein and Bride of Frankenstein get a lot of love. They get a lot of critical respect, but it feels like Son of Frankenstein does not get the same degree of respect. And I find that puzzling because I think it's a really extraordinary film. Doug, would you mind kicking us off? What was your first experience with Son of Frankenstein and just kind of your general feelings toward it?
Well, I saw all the original Universal Frankenstein films in the 70s as a kid. In Central Indiana, our horror host was Sammy Terry. So I had already seen Frankenstein, Bride of, Son of, and Ghost of before I saw Young Frankenstein.
Great.
And I agree with you. I like Son of Frankenstein too. It doesn't have the pathos that the first two have. And Karloff didn't like it as much, I think, because his part was not as rich in that way. In revisiting it, I taught a class on films in 1939 a few years ago. And in revisiting it, the expressionistic sets, which are unique to that film, really lent a different kind of creepy air to the story, I think.
Fraser, let's bounce over to you.
It's funny. I have a long history with these movies. My dad was a big Universal fanatic. And so I've watched all of these from kind of the earliest time. I was trying to think about it for this. When did I first see either one of these movies? And I honestly can't say. I don't have any memory that exists of not having seen these movies. So they've been in my life for a long time. So it's interesting. To me, Young is just as much a part of the franchise. It was only until when I was older that I realized, like, wait a minute, this movie was made like, years later, decades later. I did not realize that for a long time. I just assumed it was right there in the mix with the rest of them. And I am in firm agreement that Son is fantastic and deserves to be right up there. I think the three of them, the first one, Bride and Son, to me are a really great trilogy that sort of stands together as like legitimately, a trilogy. I was struck again watching it this time by just how well it does fit into that greater story of the whole sort of Frankenstein, arc. And it does a great job.
Michael?
I think I came to it at a disadvantage because I believe that I read much of what was written about it before I saw it. So I came to it with the prejudice that it wasn't as good as Doug hearkened to that, Karloff's performance was less than had been achieved in Bride of Frankenstein. Just the presence of Rowland V. Lee in the director's chair as opposed to James Whale's influence was an immediate shortcoming. I think in some ways it took looking at the fact that it was such a strong influence on Young Frankenstein, more so than even some of the other films, that I was able to really go back and study it and go, this, to Fraser's point, this is really has a lot of merit and is very much a worthy third within a trilogy, which, though, by today's standards, when films are planned as the superhero franchises or Lord of the Rings or Harry Potter, that they're planning these films in 20-year stretches, they weren't imagining there would be a Son of Frankenstein. So it's also, I think, the film that immediately begins to incorporate incongruities, as we chatted a little bit before, we started with things like suddenly the name of the town changed and suddenly the physical environment was not what we were accustomed to because they didn't retain those sets. They didn't try to recreate them, which I think was also part of that, not living in an era of immediate dial-up of Netflix or video or anything. They didn't imagine that people would be making those connections or finding the loose ends or looking for the loose ends. And now we scrutinize it with great frustration of going, why did Karloff's makeup change? Where did the fur thing come from? And why didn't it ever return? So I find it like the launch of what makes the rest of the series really interesting as you're looking for what retained and what stayed through and what began to get sloppy.
Dave?
I came to it after Young Frankenstein. I owe a lot of my viewing habits when I was younger to local TV, and they just didn't go past Bride. Like Abbott and Costello, but I had no idea Son or Ghost existed until, I don't know, sometime in the 90s when I could go to a video store.
Yeah, I had the same experience. They would play Frankenstein. They would play Bride of Frankenstein. They would play Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein. But Son, Ghost, even Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman didn't get as much play. I very much want to echo what you said, Michael. Like, I absolutely had the prejudice of reference books. Like the debate was whether Frankenstein or Bride of Frankenstein was the pinnacle, but no one ever mentions Son of Frankenstein in the same breath even. I think it's such a bold statement. I love what Rowland V. Lee does as a director, kind of overseeing Charles Hall. I think that he's the art director on this. Those sets are so extraordinary. Because you're like, this is not a practical house. Like, nobody actually lives here. This is absolutely a set, but it goes in such wonderful, weird directions in that way. Like you said, the costumes changes, the makeup changes. We have new characters that we've never met before. It really is kind of its own thing. The name of the town changing is so bizarre to me. Like, I'm not even sure what the value of that was. And I know, like, the screenplay went through several iterations before Rowland V. Lee was happy with it. I love all the idiosyncrasies because I think that makes this movie special.
You can sell Bride and Frankenstein easier than you can Son, because Son's got some tonal things. It is a bit of a comedy on its own. It introduces new concepts, and some of them are forever, like Igor.
It's funny that we don't ever talk about Fritz, even though he was the original. Like, Igor was the one who carried through.
I think to Fraser's point, by bringing up Ghost, and because of the way that the reason that the film was made was because there was some second run theater in Los Angeles that in the late 30s decided to pair up Frankenstein and Dracula, and there was this phenomenon because there had been a drought of Universal making horror films in the late 1930s, because I think specifically Great Britain wouldn't show them, so the market was shut down. And this became this phenomenon, which in some ways I almost look at Son being more connected to Ghost, because of the through line with Igor and the through line of Lon Chaney then out of the tar pit and all of that other stuff. There's something, I mean, when you think of it comparatively to, say the Star Wars trilogy, it's almost a bit more of The Empire Strikes Back. It's a darker film. It's a more depressing film. It's not a hopeful film. It's not as crazily joyful as Bride. And so there's a darkness to it, and the length of it. It's the longest of the Frankenstein monster films. It has its unusual pleasures, but it's not the immediate one that goes down easy. You need to kind of walk into Son of Frankenstein knowing about the other two. I don't think you can easily just come to it and immediately enjoy all of its pleasures if you don't have some idea of at least what went on in Frankenstein, because it's the whole point of Basil Rathbone's journey is rejecting and trying to deal with what Colin Clive did in the first film.
Yeah, I agree with you on that sort of darkness aspect. And I do think that's a big part of the selling point. I mean, I think a lot of these movies, especially when you talk about watching them as a kid, you envision them, I at least envision them, just for myself, as like, 2:00 on a Saturday afternoon kind of, on the TV. This one is a little bit dark for that. The Igor stuff is dark. His whole quest to get back at these people who hung him is very dark. There's the comedy of the inspector, who we can talk about for ages because he's brilliant, and Lionel Atwill is a genius. I love him so much in it. And he's very funny, but then he has that speech about the monster ripping his arm out. And I remember when that happened thinking, wow, that's shockingly violent language for the movies of this era. Like, they don't really talk about having arms ripped out at the socket very often in these movies. So it's probably a little bit harder of a 2 p.m. Sunday afternoon network sell when you think about those kinds of things.
And how they double down on the scene when the monster has Donnie Dunnigan in his hands and puts his hands on his arm, and you're like, he's going to tear that child's arm off. We know the story of what he did earlier. They really, create a credible threat to that child in this movie. And of course, if you know the early ones, little Maria didn't end up so well either. So he doesn't have a great relationship with kids.
It's even little things like the first kill that he does. There's no music over it, which gives it this sort of really chilling, you kind of hear the grunts, and it feels a lot more violent for the times than the other ones did.
I think this is a lot more Igor's story when it comes to the killings. And the monster is his instrument for doing that. So the two last killings that, to finish off the jury are really pretty grisly and enjoyable in a sort of disgusting way.
It's less the Frankenstein monster's story, but I don't think it makes it less of a quality story. Like, I'm really intrigued by the idea that Igor uses the monster as a tool of revenge. It's the perfect alibi. He doesn't need to be anywhere near, but also nobody thinks the monster is still around. And I understand that Karloff may have felt a little slighted by not being able to explore a fuller range, but I think his monster here is as monstrous as it's ever been. Like, I feel like he's genuinely terrifying. He feels like a confused child in the first couple. This one, he feels like a full-on monster, and he's real, and he's doing that kind of guttural thing in the back of his throat. When you listen to Boris Karloff's natural speaking voice, and then the noises that the monster makes, for some reason that really struck me this time. Like, wait, Karloff is making those noises.
Was there ever any consideration to have him speak in this? I know he was so against it in Bride. And of course, it ended up being such a successful addition to the film. But was that ever a discussion, or was it part of the script? And he just said, I didn't want to do it. I don't want to do it.
Well, what I've heard is that one of the reasons he was displeased with it was that breaking continuity, that he suddenly was no longer speaking. Not just that, Bela Lugosi had a better part. So yeah, I'm not sure why. I mean, I think it's justifiable, and it would have been nice had they justified it as, he was struck by lightning and that kind of short-circuited something in his brain that he no longer has the capacity for speech.
Within the story, I'd say, the fact that we first see him on this funeral bier in the laboratory back room. So whatever young Dr. Frankenstein is able to do is really all he's able to do at this point. That's how I take the story.
That's true. Yeah. That's true. Yeah. Let's talk about Wolf Frankenstein as played by Basil Rathbone. He and Colin Clive are both, playing heightened characters but they feel like completely different flavors of heightened. Like I love what Rathbone does here, and he was a genuine star at this point. He had been nominated twice, I think, for Oscars for supporting actor.
Sherlock Holmes was going strong right now.
Yep, and to see his name above Karloff's was kind of, I was like, oh, that's right. He actually gets top billing,
and he wasn't the first choice either. They were talking with Claude Rains and Peter Lorre, which would have been very bizarre to suggest that Peter Lorre was the son of Colin Clive. But
Rathbone, I think, is fantastic. I mean, I think that's one of the things that sets this apart is how well acted it is. I mean, which is not a slight on the other ones, but I feel like it's a step up, in some ways from the overall quality of the cast. Rathbone's great. The thing that I love the most about him in it is, especially as it gets later in it, this indignity that he has over the way that he's being treated, which is completely justified. The way they're treating him is totally valid. He has that speech about like, oh, you think that I just came here and made a monster because I'm a Frankenstein. You're like, that is absolutely what you just did.
Well, the scene with him and Atwell where the kid's talking about seeing the giant is fantastic. The fear that he relays is, I mean, for that time, it's rare to see that really come across that well.
And it's interesting that they could, for a vehicle like this, attract an actor of his pedigree. Tale of Two Cities and Oliver Twist, and I don't know if it was in Tale of Two Cities, but the films he made with David Selznick. And,
Robin Hood was the year before.
The Seahawk and all of those things. I mean, to attract an actor of his pedigree, you see why his name is at the top. But he's also the title character. It then introduces a whole long line of other quality actors, Sir Cedric Hartwig and other people who came into the series later who thought, no, this is something to do, not an embarrassment.
Well, and I think it was treated as a prestige picture. As you said, Michael, it was inspired by the success of that remounting of Dracula, Frankenstein, and King Kong and Son of Kong. They were like, oh, that's right. Monster movies make money. We need to make some money here. Rowland V. Lee did not like the script. He kept rewriting and they kept extending the shooting schedule as well. Like they increased the budget. Like it's interesting that Rowland V. Lee is not treated with that same regard because I think he's the one who made this film what it is. He insisted on the rewrites. He insisted on the longer shooting schedule. And there's such a different vision. It's curious that his name is not spoken with the same reverence.
And to your point, maybe this one above all the Frankenstein series films seems to have the most elaborate budget. It feels like an A picture.
Yeah, you see the money on screen.
They were very hopeful that this was going to return on the investment and they wanted to get it right.
Can we talk about Bill Lugosi as Igor? Because I think we're looking at 8 years since his heyday as Dracula, and his star has fallen a bit, and suddenly he is in it to win it and is just seizing every single opportunity to make the most of this character.
Yeah, Lugosi is great. It does feel like a last ditch, and it is, isn't it? After this, he's mostly Poverty Row, except for Ghost of Frankenstein, that off the top of my head.
Well, he's in Ghost, and he plays Frankenstein, the Frankenstein monster.
Right. But then
in Wolfman,
From my understanding, Rowland V. Lee was really the one who gave Lugosi the opportunity. He resented the fact that Universal was paying him $500 a week, knowing that they were taking advantage of him. And so in his rewrites, he kept asking them more Igor, and knowing that the performance that the guy was giving deserved it. And so it padded his paycheck. But it also created, as you're saying, a character that was naturally translated even after he's killed in this film, reappears in the next one because they're like, no, we got to have that guy back because he's so good. And it's debatable. Was this his greatest performance on film? I think, certainly a lot can be said about the work he did in The Body Snatcher. It was a cameo.
Yep.
That characterization, his last one with Karloff. And then, certainly his performance in Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein is tremendous.
This is definitely among the finest things he ever did. And I love how he does, he's got that broken neck, kind of piece sticking out, and he kind of taps on it.
Yeah.
And I can't help but feel like there's a callback to the taps on Marty Feldman's hump, because they make almost the same sound.
I'll make the argument that it is his best performance. I'm in that camp. He's just tremendous at it. We talked before about the kind of odd tone of it, and that it has these different tonal pieces, and he captures all of that. It's all that tone is just lives in his performance. That it has this humor and this funniness and the knocking on the broken neck, but also this real, like, meanness, and just sort of vitriol that you see in his face a lot of times. He captures all of those different pieces that make up the movie. They all live within his performance.
Well, he does it as a great escalation, because the first time we see him, he's goofy and self-effacing, and but by the end, he's far scarier than Karloff is.
One thing I really enjoy in this is his enthusiasm. He has he's so driven for his revenge. I love the swagger he has in the meeting with the Burgermeister and the other men. No fear at all. You killed me once. I'm here and I'm not done yet.
That whole bit where he coughs on the judge.
Right.
Yeah.
Detail.
He also has the line where he says, I stole bodies. They said, and I'm like,
I'm of the right age that my views on Bela Lugosi are very influenced by Ed Wood. Ed Wood the film, not Ed Wood the filmmaker, but the Tim Burton movie. So it's interesting. It's interesting thinking about all of this through that lens, and that film really plays up his dislike of Karloff, perhaps to a not entirely accurate degree. But it's always interesting to be thinking about that context here, and what legitimately someone like Ed Wood sees in him, and that brilliance. You see something of that here. You can see that's the same kind of inspiring performance that makes people be like, oh, this guy knows what he's doing.
I think our four actors, Karloff, Rathbone, Lugosi, and Atwill, all of them are delivering just really great performances, great characters, each of them idiosyncratic, and each of them playing off of one another. Like nobody's kind of like acting in a vacuum. Like they are working with one another, and all of them have great scenes together. All of them do. All of them have a pairing at some point.
And it's interesting to think that of those four actors, three of them are playing new characters in this film. Only one of them, who has also been given probably the most short shrift of material to work with, is Karloff. And yet, come on, anybody who watches this movie cannot be affected and surprised by the moment when Igor dies and Karloff has him in his arms and lets out, what became known as the Karloff scream, which then, I mean, I don't know of another occasion where like filmmakers have taken an actor's sound and repeated it and used it in other films, and literally called it the Karloff scream, as a piece of recording. But God, he makes so much out of so little that they've given him, while the other guys are just inventing these characters that, one of them literally the high strungness of Basil Rathbone is what Gene Wilder had to look at and go, I get that. I can do that.
That's right. And that's the thing, watching Young Frankenstein, which was how I came to this film. I'd seen Young Frankenstein first, but you go, oh my gosh, you're doing Basil Rathbone as Wolf Frankenstein. That's what's happening. It made me appreciate both performances all the more. That dart game between Wolf and Inspector Krogh, there's comedy in it. You've seen the dart game in Young Frankenstein. This one is just as funny. Him sticking the darts into his arm.
Right. Absolutely.
Which seems very impractical. He's just going to have a lot of holes in his sleeve. I don't think that's the wisest decision to make.
They milked that arm for all it was worth. I mean, even more than Brooks did. They embraced that.
And that's the thing. Like, you watch the Young Frankenstein, Inspector Kemp, and you think, well, that's ridiculous. And then you go, no, that's what they did in 1939. He's whacking that arm around and putting it back into place. The only thing that's not there is the sound effects of the gears grinding, but everything else is just as pronounced in terms of him like maneuvering that arm.
I was absolutely struck by that same thing, that he's not Kenneth Mars, right? He's not doing anything different. He's got the accent, which is a different thing, right? Sure. And so that's a different kind of joke. I'm just going to repeat what was done already and point out how silly it is.
Well, and the monocle over the eye.
The monocle is amazing.
That dart game is also where Basil Rathbone is really kind of pushing that hysteria to its breaking point. and his line about I just whipped one up. Well, since we're in a smiling mood, let us press forward and let's talk about Young Frankenstein, 1974, celebrating its 50th anniversary this year, which seems impossible to me. At the same time, it feels like it has been part of our culture for so long. Like it seems like there was never a time when this wasn't a film that was being referenced. And the fact that it came out the same year as Blazing Saddles, like, has there ever been a 1-2 punch like that outside of maybe Spielberg's Jurassic Park and Schindler's List in '93? To have two films of that magnitude that have endured as long.
I saw it in the theater, and like I said, having seen all the other ones, as a kid, and I still was a kid, it was glorious, and it was in one of the Paramount theaters, that they have around the country. So, it had its own red velvet curtain open, full big screen, and I was and still am so impressed with the look, because it really is the look of those 30s films. It doesn't look like a 1970s makeover of that. It really looks like the right castle.
I lived in a place where if you didn't have cable, you didn't get TV. But we had an amazing mom and pop video store, and it was I don't remember, mid 90s VHS release. I rented Young Frankenstein every weekend for 3 years. Young Frankenstein and this is Spinal Tap. I've had relationships with people, but that's it. We just quote these two movies at each other.
I saw it in second run at a theater in Chicago called The Patio on Irving Park Road, and it played in a double bill with a Warren Oates movie called Dillinger, inexplicably paired together.
I was like, that's an odd pairing, but okay.
But I remember that's what it was, and saw it in a theater.
Similar to Sun, it's just one of those ones that I always saw. I saw it as a kid, and my dad recorded a lot of. We had VCR early days and HBO and things like that. So he recorded tons and tons and tons of movies, and this was one that we kind of had our own mom and pop video store in my closet, and this was one of the ones that he recorded, and so I watched it all the time. That one I have not seen as recently as Sun. So when I watched it this time, it was the first time in quite a number of years I had watched it. I realized once it started, like, wow, I watched this movie so much more than I think. I know everything that happens before it happens, like every nuance of every line, not just the line, but like the inflection. It all came to me like the split second before it happened. It was fascinating.
My experience with this one was we didn't really get to watch a lot of TV in our house, and so a lot of my TV viewing was done surreptitiously after hours or when mom was gone. And this was one that my bedroom was downstairs in the basement. I knew that it was on, and so I got up late at night and turned it on, and I had it turned down really low, and I was leaned up close to the TV. During the blind hermit scene, I nearly outed myself because I was laughing so hard, and I was like choking myself with like a pillow to keep myself from laughing so loud that mom would hear me. But that's my memory, is like being so close to this movie and like trying not to laugh, which just made it all the worse. Like you, Fraser, my most recent viewing of it, yes, I know everything. And also I'm still astonished by the attention to detail, the subtlety of the performances. Like, how could you possibly know to do that line that way to get that laugh? It just feels like such a high watermark of film comedy, full stop. Like, I don't think you get much funnier than this movie at its best.
Yeah, it's a masterclass in comedy, from the writing to the directing to the acting to the design, to the way that you balance the embracing the source material with sort of making fun of the source. I mean, it's a masterclass. You study it in any college class on comedy and do very well for yourself. And
it's a film that has so much of the material that were outtakes available to watch. I mean, just the scene, the sort of famous breakup scene with Madeline Kahn coming into the castle and Marty Feldman, munching on her fur and going, her fur stole.
I was hoping you'd go back for it.
Yeah, no, they're the kids. But when you watch those multiple takes, No, that's not it. No, I mean, that's funny, but that's not it. It's the take that's in the film is the perfect take and the only take. And it's one of those lessons that just shows you it's a comedy is a matter of degrees. Too much this, too little of that, not enough of this. The camera wasn't quite, your head wasn't right. It is truly perfection in that sense when you can compare any of the other takes they might have taken.
Well, it's an acted film as well. I watched it with the commentary of Mel Brooks, and by the end, he said, by the end of the film, I'm not laughing so much as feeling with these characters, which is a very un-Mel Brooks kind of thing to say. Usually, he mentions Peter Boyle. Went right to the heart of the monster. Came up with the reaching for the butterflies. All of the characters play it straight, as straight as can be with comic timing. And I think that's a real key to why it's lasted as one of the great film comedies.
Well, and I think you're right. Everybody is invested in the situation except for Marty Feldman, who definitely knows there's an audience watching. For me, he feels like he's the Mel Brooks avatar. Like he's the one going, you see this? You see this? Just make sure I want to make sure you got that. But for some reason, that's the right ingredient. Like we need that moment to diffuse the situation, to remind everybody we're all here having fun, and then getting back into the quote drama of it.
Right. Yeah. He knows we're there. He's the only one.
The thing about it is that the fact that so many horror fans love it because they respect the fact that Mel Brooks fought for these things. And of all the achievements in the film, the perfect casting, the beautiful sets, the reverence to the connectivity of the storyline and everything, it's the fact that they fought for the black and white. I think it's the thing that doesn't make it love at first bite, which is itself a great film, similar era, but that color and disco thing that they gave over to as opposed to fighting for, we want to do James Whale proud.
And there's homages to Frankenstein, Bride of Frankenstein, Son of Frankenstein. Like they go back, and I think you're right, Michael. That's why horror fans love it, is that there is a reverence there at the same time that there's the spoofing of it. And I think it was Fraser that said, like, you're not actually going that much further in the outrageous department than those original films did as well.
And that they could have recreated, but no, they literally got Kenneth Strickfaden's machinery. They found him and they brought it and they restored it. And it's the real stuff.
And apparently it was in his garage. Amazing.
I wouldn't throw that out if I had it. I mean, I'm gotta go somewhere.
With the reference, I said at the beginning that as a kid, I did not acknowledge that these two movies we're talking about were made 35 years apart. They and that is because of that black and white. That is because of that reference. It's because when you see it, it just looks exactly the same as the other one, which is so impressive. Though I will say the one point where I thought to myself, is the beginning when Gene Wilder is making his presentation in the college. That definitely, as it pans over the college there, you're like, all right, this might be 1974.
You got the guy with long hair.
Yeah, you got the hair, you got the exit signs. There's a whiff of the 70s in that shot, but that's okay. We can deal.
And Brooks, I think, does that intentionally to take us. We're going to literally take you back in time, take you, like on that train ride, which I'm like a train ride from the USA to Europe. How does that work? Here's my question. I've been looking around. I haven't found the answer. How is it that Universal did not produce this film? Because it was developed at Columbia, and then 20th Century Fox took it over because they said they would give them the budget that Columbia wouldn't. But I'm like, how was this not produced under the Universal umbrella? And how was not oodles of money paid to Universal, since so much of it is, a direct homage to those films?
Parody under the parody laws, I guess. I mean, because as I say, would Love at First Bite have had to do the same thing? I mean, they definitely were hearkening to Dwight Fry and Lugosi's performance and his costume and things like that. I mean, I'm assuming it's just parody, but yeah, it's insane. And the people at Universal, people got fired.
It's more than transformative enough to cover that. Just the tone of it, Feldman alone you could stick him in any of those and it would be transformative enough, generally speaking. But what Michael was saying, this viewing is the first time I've noticed how gorgeous some of those shots are, especially the reconstructed ones.
Well, and Brooks talks about how with Gerald Hirschfeld, the cinematographer, he wanted to do zooms and he said, no, I want you to do the mechanics of what they could do in the 30s. And we subtly don't, we don't pick up on that. And the little irises that go in.
Your wipes. Right. Yeah.
Yeah. And all of those little telltale things that only fans of the genre would go, wow, you're really paying attention to stuff that really nobody would notice. But we're feeling the vibe, the degree of reverence, research that was done, and resistance to making it fun and modern and putting in a disco number or something like that.
The idea originated with Gene Wilder. Like, he was working on the script. It came to pass that he and Mel Brooks ended up collaborating on it. But I think Wilder's performance is like Basil Rathbone's. It walks that line all the way through. It's hysterical but grounded. And I don't know, I mean, that feels like a kind of weird alchemy that should not work and absolutely does.
Well, I like the journey he makes from when he's in the classroom at the beginning, totally rejecting, not even wanting to talk about his father's work until that, of course, the wonderful student who keeps needling him, he finally admits it, and doesn't want to, but then he gets, the box and goes back. And only when he takes on his father's reverence for this creation, does he get to those levels of hysteria.
On paper, it's really not a very likable character. He's petulant. He's kind of shitty to people. The whole breakfast scene. I mean, if you describe it, yeah, he puts his hands all in his breakfast because he's a baby, But it's so funny because of his commitment. There's something about it that makes him the hero, even though as a person he's kind of a prig and a bit of a shit.
Because he plays a lot of colors just in that opening scene. His whole thing with the experiment where he knees the guy in the groin and then gives him an extra buck. As the drama progresses, he gets more and more hysterical. But he's always up and down. The sedative scene is just like he goes absolutely to the top and then drops it back. I won't be angry. I won't be angry.
That's right.
Most of his laughs come from his hysteria, but you're right. He does have these moments where he gets it from going in the complete opposite direction. I think about from that first scene where he stabs himself with the scalpel, and he has that great, amazing moment where he just opens his hand and sees that it's still there and closes it back on. And it's so good, but it's small.
The whole sequence with the doctor perform warm milk.
Oh my gosh!
Just watching him. And it's so smart. He does nothing but watches her and mirrors in reverse everything she does.
Her way of moving in that scene is amazing. The way that she glides back to give him every option.
The same spot each time. Yeah. Such precision to it.
Right. And every answer seems to pain her.
Yes. Well, and when he shouts at her and she first closes her eyes, and then second time, she tightens her lips. Oh my God, Cloris Leachman, you are such a hero in this movie.
Now she's one that's, her character is doesn't have an exact parallel in the Frankenstein movies. On the commentary, Brooks said that she was trying for a Judith Anderson, I presume, Mrs. Danvers look. Also, the look is a little bit like Una O'Connor's Minnie in Pride Up, even though the character's not at all the same.
Well, and the Frau Blucher thing, this was something that I bought into the whole urban legend that Blucher meant glue, and that's why all the horses freaked out. Turns out that's not the case at all. It's just an outrageous running gag that just happens to work.
We don't know, but the horses know.
That's right. They know that she's trouble. I think it's just a parody of somebody, and they mention a name and you hear dun dun dun.
Yeah.
I think like that the horses whinnying is the dun dun dun.
Oh, it's amazing.
Let's talk about Terry Garr, because she's another one that she's doing so much with that role. That role could have just been a nothing part. She finds so much hilarious nuance with her accent, with her guilelessness.
And she's the one actor who was super green. She was not. I mean, everybody else had some relationship with Brooks, or or had some kind of notable career going on. She was just a fresh-faced kid, walked in and auditioned.
Well, one thing Brooks said that I hadn't really noticed before. He said all the dirty jokes he gave to Inga because she played them so innocently,
Right.
And you get a lot of them.
And okay, going back to Son of Frankenstein, those knockers are there. It's the same giant knockers.
Huge. Yeah.
I wrote in my notes as I was watching, I was jotting some things down to talk about. In my notes for Son of Frankenstein, I wrote, wow, look at those amazing big knockers on the door. And I was like, oh, that's the joke.
You just said it.
It just came in my brain. Oh, it was amazing.
Well, and that thunderstorm, the Son of Frankenstein thunderstorm is incredible. I mean, Dario Argento would be proud. And that crazy, like, square umbrella that Benson is holding, like, that is just, it's an amazing thunderstorm, because those actors are, like, really fighting against it. But we have another great rainstorm here. I mean, there's several rain sequences, one of which, of course, is played for laughs,
Right, yes. The graveyard.
One thing with Terry Garr that we were talking about, Cloris Leachman, talking about her, we haven't even talked about Madeline Kahn yet.
Oh my
but it's interesting that Mel Brooks has these really dynamic female parts that are contributing fully to the comedy. We didn't mention a word about any actress in our conversation about Son, and if we talked about a lot of Universal movies, that would probably be the case. That's definitely
outside of Una O'Connor, like, they just aren't as memorable.
Yeah, they're just not doing a lot. And I appreciate that's a way that he is perhaps not faithful to the source material, but in a really good way, and being like, no, let's do something with these characters.
I mean, I've been picked up more than once having someone sing "Rowland Hay" at me, so
and it works
every time. I'm not proud. Okay.
Her little bit of accent, put Sikendel Beck. She carried that throughout the film. It was just enough for a little tweak of humor on the ethnicity.
Well, and one thing that the film has, and especially at this time, as you're pointing out, Aaron, due to Blazing Saddles, is that it's one of those rare occasions where you're talking about a stock company. He had actors that he worked with over and over again, and in the same way, like with Spinal Tap, where there's joy in having those same actors come back and interact with each other, now playing different characters. And some of them went on with him, and some of them had already acted with him, like Kenneth Mars in Producers. And you don't see that a lot, like clear acting companies. And then even when Gene Wilder went on and made some of his own movies, World's Greatest Lover and stuff like that, a lot of those people ended up in his movies, where they almost seem like, is this a Mel Brooks movie? It's got the Mel Brooks company, and the Mel Brooks humor, but no Mel Brooks, just Gene Wilder.
Right.
The easiest one to compare it to is Sherlock Holmes' smarter older brother, which just does not land near. It's almost the same cast, same writers. It just does not. It's missing something.
One thing I was very pleased with on this rewatch, as I said, it's been a little while, and I was I'll say I was perhaps a little nervous going into this, because it's been a bit, when you go back and revisit comedies from the 70s and 80s, there's a danger of what dicey material is going to be in there, and this one was pretty devoid of that. There's a little bit of, as it gets towards the end, we start to get into some kind of weird sexual stuff with the monster, with Madeline Kahn, but for the most part, he's not venturing into those waters, which is appreciated, and I was very pleased with that. I will own to a little bit of trepidation that, like, oh baby, there's some scene in here that I have forgotten about that is going to happen, and I'm going to be like, oh, but there wasn't much of that.
Yeah, agreed. As much as it walks that line of being inappropriate, it's funny enough that I think that everyone accepts it, that it's meant in a generous and comedic way, not as a commentary on, either sex.
Well, those jokes land in a way that I didn't have to explain it to the child I was watching with.
Well, her response to his first, when he has his way with her being "Ah, sweet mystery of life,"
Well, that one, there was a pause, and I'm not explaining that, so just go on with it. That one you got to just puzzle out on your own. Have fun.
Right.
Well, and watching Madeline Kahn at the train station when she's saying goodbye to, her introduction, like that whole where she's playing all of those colors, so many flavors. She really does so much with. It's not a big character. I feel like this happens all the time. Peter Boyle kind of gets forgotten in the discussion of this film, and his performance was the one that I appreciated the most this time around, because I said, he's doing so much. He's doing so many little nuanced things. And he's the second build. Like he gets second billing for, he was a legit, star at this point. He gives the same kind of Karloff pathos to it, where we watch him being a child in a world that he doesn't understand and that really doesn't understand him.
One of my favorite of his scenes is, of course, the hermit scene, which he and Gene Hackman play so wonderfully. And actually, that is one other, besides Marty Feldman, he does give us a look after his mug gets broken. And then his timing when his thumb is on fire is perfect.
It's great timing in that scene. And then if you're talking about him, the other thing that we haven't talked about is putting on the Ritz, which is maybe the most, when all is said and done, is maybe the most timeless element of the whole movie, possibly that one distilled scene. And obviously his voice is hilarious in that, and every time he sings it's hilarious. But I was struck this time too by how good he is at the dancing part and at the sort of awkward but suave, but like walking that line in the dancing is really fantastic.
Where he had to have learned how to do this, and then he had to back it off a little bit to be not good at it. I was really struck by that.
Now, I've got a question about that scene, and tell me what you all think. I haven't seen any reference from Gene Wilder or Mel Brooks, but it reminds me of the scene from King Kong when Carl Denham puts Kong on display, and the same result happens.
I always thought it was.
Yeah, same.
But the other thing is, like, that scene is the one that is the most risky. It is the one that could have undone everything that went before. It could have gone so horribly wrong. It could have felt so tonally wrong. And it was one that Wilder and Brooks fought a lot about, whether to include it or not. And, the legend goes that, like, Wilder was like nearly purple in the face, and Mel Brooks went, okay, it's in. And he said, why did you make me go through all that? He's like, I wasn't sure, but I knew if you were sure, then it would work. And it does. It is, as you said, Fraser, it's one of the most memorable moments in the film. Iconic.
I have to wonder, coming recently off of Blazing Saddles, and the moment that Blazing Saddles then switches over to the musical number with Dom DeLuise, when suddenly we're in a total, and it's, the French Mistake. And I'm wondering if Brooks was a little concerned that it would seem like it was repeating the same device of suddenly we've turned this into a musical that we weren't prepared for, and that it's completely, it has nothing to do with the Frankenstein films, which we've been so mindful of doing, and that he'd be risking repeating himself.
Right. No, that's true. That's true.
And I mean, that's not, Producers has that, History of the World has that, but not to quite the same degree. But the lone musical number is certainly a bit for him.
But this being his fourth film with the 12 chairs,
he might have started to worry that they're going to say it's his trademark, gimmick.
But it worked, and it worked in such a way that you're like, like you're saying, it's the thing that solidified it as being just a colossally great film, because it was so successful and such a wild card to pull out at that moment.
it's a big swing, right? And that's the thing. I just rewatched the other day Barbie, a very different movie, but rewatched Barbie and was thinking about how much the I'm just Ken section of that is a big swing that kind of makes it in certain ways. And movies need that sometimes. You got to go for it. But you're right, Aaron, that there is the risk that the big swing can tank it, because we talked before about how he resists the disco moment. That's as close as it comes. It sort of starts to nudge into that territory a little bit, but not enough to sink it. But you can easily envision how it could.
There are two things though going on in the scene, because I think what the laugh is that the monster is singing and dancing, but what keeps the scene from going off the rails is, number one, the illusion that Gene Wilder is as good as Fred Astaire, genuinely committing to the dance number, right. Even though the taps are put in, he's playing it like he really is. And then when the light bulb breaks, he is as intensely and committed to that moment of calming him down. It doesn't get goofy. You get scared for a moment. You know what's going to happen. Yeah. You know that it's going to go wrong. And it's the King Kong moment that Doug is talking about. We've seen it happen before. We know he's going to rampage through the city, and that all might be lost. I mean,
him trying to calm the monster is probably the most true sort of horror moment in the whole thing. Just that little bit of him trying to calm him down. If you could slot that directly into any horror movie, and it would feel accurate.
One horror element that I think the film does really well is the science fiction ethic end of it, because it includes the should I be messing with life, and also the grave robbing. Both of those are parts of the earlier Frankenstein.
We'll never know.
We were doing so well.
Oh, that's sad.
Because what I was just about to say was, does anybody have any final moments from Young Frankenstein that you'd like to highlight?
No, because I'm going to just quote the whole movie at you. I mean, that's the problem. There's not one. Werewolf. I'm going to get in the car and drive to see Godzilla -1 - color, and I'm going to say at some point, Werewolf, because I have to.
Very small moment. I love the sign on the door that says "Drop brains in the slot after 5 p.m." That's such a stupid bit, but it's so good.
I think the wrap up at the end with the Bride of Frankenstein making a sort of a cameo was just such a great touch, and just so smart.
And mine is going to be the obvious spit take after the dart game. It says nice grouping, because I love the fact that Kemp is so invested in making a good impression of this dart game that he goes over and sticks them all in his center, goes back and does this elaborate noise of the darts being thrown. Thank you all so much. And our apologies to Doug just texted and said my iPad ran out of battery. So technology fails us once again, as these movies have shown us over and over again. But thank you, Doug, for hanging in there until almost the end. And looking forward to having you all again on the show very soon. Until next time, keep searching, keep exploring, and keep sharing the scare.